Alrighty, ecological succession. Ecological succession is a series of predictable stages of growth that an ecosystem goes through. We're not just like, boom, ecosystem, fully formed, ready to go. No, it has to go through some growth stages. There are two types, primary and secondary. Pretty straightforward there, no big complicated words. So next up, I want to go through primary succession. Primary succession starts from bare rock. No dirt, no soil, just rock. And somewhere where we might see something like this happen is after perhaps a volcanic eruption. So we spew lots of lava, it runs down and cools into rock. There's no dirt on top of it, it's just going to be hard lava rock. Another option for this one is we have our underwater volcanoes. They're spewing up their lava, it's cooling in the ocean, and it builds and it builds and builds until it breaks the surface and we get a little island. Once again, it's going to be just rock, not a lot of dirt. We're going to have to make that soil. Another place is glaciers. So we are experiencing incredible, Hawaii. We're experiencing incredible glacial retreat right now due to climate change. And as those glaciers melt, what they're sitting on top of is just rock. There's nothing underneath it, just rock. So there's another place where we might see primary succession. Places perhaps that have been affected by severe erosion. Maybe all the soil gets washed away in a flood or rainstorm, or it gets blown away, whatever. Severe erosion leaving just bare rock. Another example, man-made structures like parking lots. If we pour a bunch of concrete or asphalt, we don't have a very habitable place for vegetation. Maybe sometimes if we see cracks, though, we'll get some weeds or whatever, but for the most part, especially in like maybe a parking structure with multiple levels, it's just concrete. There's no dirt to support vegetation. So we're starting from bare rock. The very first things on the scene are going to be things like moss and lichen. They are great first species because they can get carried by the wind. They reproduce via spores. So they kind of put those up into the air, and wind comes and blows those spores to a new place to establish new little mosses and lichens. Perhaps maybe if we're talking about the Hawaiian island chain, if we are experiencing more volcanic activity, we get a little tiny new island. It's going to be bare rock. Maybe from an adjacent or nearby Hawaiian island, it'll blow over some new lichen and moss spores and start making our new Hawaiian island. Once that soil has been established, we can move on to acquiring plants and animals. So once again, without that soil, we can't start having plants. And without plants, there are producers. They're the basis of all of our ecosystems. Without those, we can't have consumers. So we got to get that soil going before we can add in plants and animals. So here is some vocab. First up, I want to talk about pioneer species. Thinking about the words here, pretty self-explanatory. Pioneer species, first on the scene. We're thinking about Western colonization. Those pioneers are coming to the Western United States, those European pioneers, to establish new towns and cities and things like that. So they're going where it's not established. They're pioneering and going to be the first on the scene. So pioneer species, they're going to have to be really hardy and strong because they're colonizing barren environments. There's nothing there except for rock. Without, this hardiness, they're just going to die and nothing will happen. In primary succession, when we're starting with just bare rock, moss and lichen are fantastic pioneer species. Lichen are the only organism that eats rock. They literally just eat rock, and then over hundreds and hundreds of years, that rock gets turned into soil. Now we have some soil. Lichen was working really hard. And next up, we will get intermediate species. Again, looking at these words, intermediate means kind of middle, center, not the very first, not the very last, just kind of somewhere in the middle here. Intermediate species are things like grasses, shrubs, small trees that are shade intolerant, meaning they need a lot of sunlight. Once we establish those first sort of producers, we can get our first consumers. Insects, small animals, reptiles, birds, mammals. Really, really small though, because we don't have a lot of food. Right? Crazy. The last step is climax community. This is a word we heard on Wednesday. Climax communities are the final stage. That's our maintaining. We're at, our peak here. We're jiving. We're just gonna maintain. We're not gonna grow anymore. We're not gonna die off. We're just gonna jive, do our climax community thing. These are fully formed ecosystems. Crazy biodiversity, lots of different species of plants and animals. We're having many food webs. We got all of our trophic levels. Climax community is like the goal. That's where we want all of our ecosystems to be. And each biome is going to have specific species to their climax communities. Kind of makes sense. A desert's going to have completely different species than a rainforest or a tundra. Whatever species are there are best adapted to that specific environment. So here is a little image, kind of like picturing and visualizing what's going on here. So primary succession, we start with that bare rock. We get some lichen here, eating and breaking down some of those rocks, making some soil. Again, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, rocks don't break down very easily or quickly. Once you start getting the little first bits of soil, we get our, pretty simple grasses, some very, very small plants that are getting blown in, perhaps pooped out by passing animals if they eat seeds. Then we get into bigger and bigger things. In our intermediate species, we're getting bigger bushes and shrubs. We're getting those shade intolerant trees. Kind of makes sense. If, we're starting from nothing, as we're growing, we want trees that need that sunlight. Once we reach our climax community, then we're going to see more of those shade tolerant trees, those that are casting shadows. If I am just sprouting in a climax community, I'm probably going to need to be able to grow in shade. Otherwise, I'm not going to get much sun. Those big, tall trees are already established, casting all that shade. All right, next up, secondary succession. Secondary succession is almost the same as primary succession, except just a few little differences. Secondary succession, we've already got established soil. We're going from a climax community that has experienced some sort of disturbance, where all the plants are just poof, gone. Examples, we are very, very familiar with wildfires here as native Californians. So, a fire rips through some sort of mountainous dry area. It's going to burn up all of that dry brush. And also because all that vegetation is gone, the animals are going to leave too, because there's nothing to eat. Maybe perhaps after a tornado, we got, things that are getting pulled up out of the ground. It's basically making everything flat, pulling up all that plant. Maybe after a flood in Louisiana, they have a bunch of levees. We in your lifetime and my lifetime, we saw, what happens when those levees break. We get a huge flood, and if we don't get rid of that water fairly quickly, it's going to drown all of the plants and animals. Most likely, we can't get rid of all that giant amount of water in time, so we're going to have what's called a disturbance. We're going to start from scratch. Everything died off. The last one is human land clearing. Humans are the worst for the Earth's health. A lot of times, we're going to see land clearing where we want to start agricultural farms. We need lots of space to grow food, but that's not really great because we're ripping everything out of the ground, starting over from scratch. One of the differences between secondary and primary succession is that because secondary succession already has the soil, we're going to jump right in with small plants as our pioneer species. We don't need to break down the rock into soil if we already have the soil. So this means it's going to take a lot less time to get to that climax community because, once again, we're not having to worry about breaking down rock. We already got that soil. So just like I just mentioned, pioneer species will be a little bit different. They still have to be fairly hardy because they're starting, the process in a sort of bare environment. But we're looking more at starting with producers, not lichens and mosses. Even perhaps some little insects that eat those grasses and small shrubs and things like that. Everything after that, pretty much the same. We got our intermediate species, our climax community. The big difference here is we're starting from soil, so it's going to take less time, and our pioneer species are just a little bit different. So here's what it would look like. This example includes a wildfire. We're burning down all the vegetation. So sad. Starting over, no plant life here, just pretty bare. Then we already have the soil, so right off the bat, our pioneer species are going to be these small little plants, grasses, flowers, small bushes and shrubs, and then we'll gain momentum into growing more and more diverse species. All right, a little bit of a summary, and then this short slideshow will be over. So the pioneer species come in first, colonize the bare in the case of primary succession, or disturbed in the case of secondary succession, site. They help build up the soil and provide nutrients. The pioneer species will be different depending on if it's primary or secondary succession. New species of plants displace existing plants. Makes sense. Grass needs a lot of sunlight because it's basically just a bunch of leaves coming out of the ground. They're not very shade tolerant. As we go through our succession and we build up a bigger and bigger community with bigger and bigger organisms and plants, they're going to be more suited to that environment. So as I'm starting to grow some shrubs, they're going to cast some shade, they're going to sort of box out that grass, they're going to take over some more space. They're more well suited to that new environment. Newly arriving species alter those physical conditions. Again, same thing, like as we get bigger and bigger plants and animals, they're going to be more and more suited to this environment, kind of pushing out the original stuff because the original stuff was more generic, like, oh, great, now we have dirt, let's grow some grass, kind of find grass and those types of producers pretty much everywhere. But as we progress, we're going to find more and more specific plants and animals. Animals come in with or after the plants they need to survive. Kind of makes sense, common knowledge there. If I don't have anything to eat, I shouldn't go there. I need to be coming in with or after those plants that I need are already established and living. Eventually, a climax community that is pretty much stable will become established. Just kind of chilling, doing its climax community thing. It will be a climax community forever until it gets a disturbance, whether that's a wildfire, human land clearing, floods, whatever. That's the only reason why a climax community would sort of deteriorate. And these disturbances just start the cycle all over again. Okay, we're going to clear some land for some agriculture. After a few decades, we'll probably see some secondary succession happening, more new plant and animal species coming in to take over that new ecosystem. All right, that'll be it for the slideshow. Any comments, questions, concerns, clarifications? Do I need to go back for notes?